Okay, hi everybody. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. This is not our usual live time, but today I'm actually kind of feeling a little bit like nervous and excited and kind of overwhelmed, but I'm just honestly thrilled that we are going to be talking with Dr. Jessica Zucker. I had a miscarriage fame, and she has been a real mentor of mine from the beginning. Just can't wait to talk to her. This is, you guys, you're gonna love her as much as I do. I mean, you already love her. I don't even know what I'm saying. Like, this is like so patently ridiculous. So, hello, how are you? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can't see you. Are you talking to me?
Excellent. Excellent. Welcome to Technology
I
2021.
know. I know. I feel in my office. Okay. Did
All
you
right,
just
let's
purpose to talk to me? Oh
I, I
no.
I said I'm like nervous, overwhelmed, and excited all at the same time. It's like this like weird like constellation of symptoms like that I'm
I,
diagnosing myself with. Wait, okay, hold on. Can you see me now?
I can see you. Can you see me?
Yes, excellent. And you can hear me, so this is great.
It's
Okay,
working. Oh,
okay,
yay.
excellent. So, Dr. Zucker, let's discuss. First of all, okay, let me take you guys back for 5 seconds. So she's going to talk about her history and why this book is important, why this movement is important, why so many things. But I need to bring this personal for me because I know you're doing lots and lots and lots of these interviews now, as you should, because this book is really it's extremely important for the community at large. But for me personally, you have been a mentor of mine from a distance without even knowing. And then I spoke to you and you generously, I outlined a bit of this already. Um, you generously gave of your time when I was thinking about creating this space. I was supposed to have a baby. And I said, like, so just tell me why this was important to you, like what you thought was still missing from this space. So like, let's go back
Yeah.
and like start from the beginning. Like the book obviously starts with a story. Like this all comes from your own this all comes from a personal story and things that you've been through. So take everybody back, tell them who you are and where this all began.
Sure. I'm happy to. Are those your kids in the background?
Yeah, isn't it phenomenal? Welcome, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's like as much as I like say, guys, you need to be quiet now. Like, it's all good.
As long as you can concentrate. I can't do these from home because it's too much for me. Right. So thank you so much for having me. And yes, our relationship predates this moment because we did have a long conversation. What year was that?
It
2019?
was 2019. It was the summer of 2019.
Yes. And so you've created this beautiful, important community. Um,
Thank you.
so it's really,
Thank you.
I'm so grateful to be part of it. So where should I start? So you may have mentioned before I got on, I'm a psychologist and I specialize in women's reproductive and maternal mental health and have done so for about 15 years at this point. And so I think most people assume that I began to specialize in this area upon losing a pregnancy. And actually, for me, that's not the case. So I pursued a master's degree in public health and I worked in international women's rights for several years. And then when I decided to pursue my PhD, I wanted to somehow marry my interests. So I wanted to kind of bring the global women's rights, women's health related stuff that I was doing previously into the intimacy of a clinical practice. And so that's what I've done. So I've been sitting here in my office, obviously pre-COVID, uh, talking with people who are struggling to get pregnant, losing pregnancies, uh, reduced multiples, enduring stillbirth, infant loss, perinatal and postpartum mood and anxiety disorders, terminating for medical reasons, the whole spectrum. And all
And
the
you were doing this again, like I just want this to be clear because I think that this is a really important point. Like you
yeah,
were doing this all before you had your own experience in this space.
I was doing all of this before I had ever been pregnant. Uh, yes. And then I decided to, we decided it was time to start our family. I was lucky enough, grateful enough to get pregnant straight away. And then I got to enjoy this very blissful, naive experience of pregnancy. No problems whatsoever, no hiccups. My son even his due date. Like all of these just don't typically happen. And that and somehow I think because I didn't have a history that related to the topic, even though of course I was sitting here empathically listening, very present for people, I wasn't afraid during the pregnancy. I mean, I was of course aware that miscarriage as frequently as it does, 1 in 4 pregnancies, but I just kind of went through it. I wasn't overwhelmed by anxiety. And then about 3.5 years later, we decided to expand our family. And 16 into the second pregnancy, I had a miscarriage while I was home by myself. And when I say I was home by myself, I mean that basically I had to, go through this entire ordeal alone. Of course, phoned by my doctor. So she, explained to me what to do, all of the particulars, and sort of kept me very surreal documentary like experience. So I had to cut the umbilical cord myself. And then, of course, I promised hemorrhage because until the placenta is out, you continue to bleed. And then I just, laid the baby on a nearby hand towel. My husband got home as quickly as possible, and then we went straight to my doctor's office, brought the baby in a bag to be tested, and then I undergo an unmedicated DNC. So, and for anybody listening who might be pregnant or might be thinking about getting pregnant, this is the most sort of unusual that I've even heard in all my years sitting here listening. As you all know, a majority of miscarriages happen within the first trimester. And most of the time you go to an appointment and you find out there's no heartbeat.
Right.
Not to say that any of that is less traumatic, but I mean, mine was just sort of like so gory and so ongoing, and just very unusual,
I've heard you tell this before. I mean, I've heard you tell it to me, but I've heard you talk about this before. I've seen you write about this, and just every time I hear it, it just like, because, look, again, like personalizing it, mine were exactly the other way. It was always going into the doctor's office and no heartbeat, either first trimester or second trimesters, but always that experience as opposed to this like horrifically physical, like expelling. There's literally no other word to describe it. And just the trauma. Every time I hear this, I just, my heart is just, yeah.
It's wild. And I, it's, it takes your breath away, basically. I mean, what's interesting looking back, even though, time kind of slowed completely and also sped up so fast, I didn't even know sort of how to make like seem possible in terms of like gathering my things to go to the doctor's office and to make sure that I didn't bleed to death on the floor there in my bathroom. But in a way, the fact that I got to sort of be with her, no, it wasn't long enough. I really wish I had spent more time, with this baby. But the fact that I was in the peace of my own home and that out in one piece, there was something kind of dramatic and beautiful about the way that it unfolded as well. I mean, again, completely unbelievable. I wish it happened. Yeah. So anyway, I mean, long story short, suffice it to say that this tragic experience shifted my personal life lens and my professional trajectory in a very
Look, I think that, you know, we can never predict, right? Like when people talk about these kinds of experiences, like, in your head, you can never ever say these things of like, well, this, I would have preferred it to happen like this or preferred it to happen like that. But I love the way you said it in the way that like you with time, and because so much of this is about perspective of like, there's the moments of the immediacy, which like we all replay in our minds, and it's like slow motion, but almost like it's so blurred that there are so many pieces we don't remember, but
yes.
yet there are so many other pieces that we replay over and over and over again in our minds, and have this conversation with ourselves. We have the what ifs all the time. I should have, and could have, could I have, and what if, and what if, and what if, and what if. That's the nature of all of it.
Yeah, I mean, and that surely accompanied me through my next pregnancy. I mean, it was treacherous, right? So my doctor suggested that we wait 3 cycles. So on the 4th cycle, I became pregnant again. And I mean, talk about what ifs. I was what ifing all day long, day and night, thinking
Right.
like, how do I know?
Right.
And in my loss, I really did not actually turn to blaming myself, and I don't know if that's because I had had a healthy pregnancy prior, so I sort of had that to lean on. I assumed that it meant something was wrong with the baby, and I won't give all the details away because people can read here. Um, but yeah, the what if cycle can be debilitating. And I think that anybody that goes to get pregnant again after loss or tries to get pregnant again after pregnancy loss, it's life changing, you know.
Look, it's exactly what you said before in terms of describing your first pregnancy, where you were saying you just went through this, like, yes, being in the field and working in the space and hearing all of these stories from all of your patients, you knew what those possibilities were. But
Yes.
until it happens to you, you think, and I also, in terms of my own personal life as a pediatrician, I also knew what all of the possibilities were. I'm not an OBGYN. I don't pretend to be, but we do take all of those different courses and sort of the development of the fetus and all of the different pieces, and we do an OBGYN rotation as pieces of this. So I knew what all of those possibilities would be, but did I think it would ever happen to me? Also, like for me as well, my first pregnancy was this like naive beautifulness, and then
Right. And it's not like we don't think it'll happen to us because dot, 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 because you're a doctor, because I'm a psychologist, because I specialize. No, it's just that in life, it's like we have to walk around in a hearty state of denial without thinking about all the possible things that
love
could go,
that.
or else we wouldn't
Yes.
leave the house.
Correct.
Right.
And people say the same thing to me about this work now. Like they always say, like, how do you sit with people's stories? And I'm sure they say the same thing to you now as well. Like before and then, like, and now, like, how do you sit and hear people's stories over and over again? And my answer always is, because it's not my story,
Mm,
because I have this separation, I have this distance, I can hear people's stories because it's not my own anymore.
yes.
But I don't think, and I this is what I'm really curious about from you, I don't think that I could have done this work if I was still in the midst of my own journey. And
Yeah.
so I'm curious for you, in terms of your own practice. Were you seeing patients while you were, when you were pregnant after loss? Like, were you able to separate those pieces?
I mean, I wouldn't say separate. I would say I was forced to integrate in a way that most often, psychologists don't, which is like, this idea that there's some objectivity or, distance within the relationship. They knew I was pregnant. My frame is small, and so, very people knew I was all the three times, And so then it was incumbent upon me to inform them that I had lost the pregnancy. And yeah, I mean, I get into this in the book, I think it's chapter 2 or 3, the complexity of all of that, that in my training en route to becoming a psychologist, never once was there talk of a psychologist pregnancy, let alone the loss of it, and how to, integrate this into the relationship, how to process this, and how to deal with something that is grief stricken for the therapist. Because the truth is, a therapist could be depressed, anxious, going through divorce, an eating disorder, even. A parent could have died, and the patient would never know.
Right.
You can keep these things to yourself, and as we should, But in this case, unlike any other, it's physically obvious, And so I didn't have a choice. I had to be open and honest, with the people who sat across from me. And it was incredibly triggering for so many people. The fact that I got pregnant easily, or the fact that I stayed pregnant in my first pregnancy, then the fact that I miscarried so late into the pregnancy, then returning to these patients, and people saying, well, if this happened to you, is it going to happen to me? Or
Right.
did this happen to you because it happened to me? Like a lot
Right.
of confusion and projection and fear that now maybe I'm not in a position to be the steady one in the relationship. And they weren't wrong.
Right. 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 That's exactly it. Right.
It is exactly it. And I think more psychologists or more therapists, could talk about this, or could try to be a little bit more vulnerable and real with themselves and with the world about the fact that we're human, and that things can happen in our lives that change the trajectory of our work lives, and how real that is. And so I bring the reader in my book into this very situation, so that people can see just how complex and confusing it can be.
And so can you also talk us through, like, one of the pieces I specifically asked you about, and when you and I spoke in 2019, is I said to you, tell me the way, like, look, I was supposed to have a baby is a space for the Jewish community at large, to be supportive for anyone who's struggling. And one of the things that struck you, I remember you saying to me, was when you brought your oldest child to preschool and they knew you had a miscarriage and nobody said anything. And so, like, as you're in the midst of all of this, like, can you speak to a little bit of that, sort of the Jewish community, but also the community at large, like, just in general, what people said to you, what they didn't say to you, and then also into your next pregnancy, what they said to you and what they didn't say to you?
Well, I mean, I think in a way you're remembering the conversation in a sort of rosier way, maybe, than I told you, or maybe I just didn't tell you all the sullied details. But
okay, well, let's have the tell all now.
want to like throw anybody under the bus, but basically, yes, my son at the time was at a Jewish preschool, and so we were, of course, a part of this Jewish community, not heavily involved by any means, but just, we were congregants, and we attended the school. And yeah, I got a call from one of the leaders there the day after my loss, and she proceeded to basically say, like, I have only one child and it's amazing. Anyway, that was one thing, but that's necessarily Jewishly related, but I would think that I would have received different words. I also think that
I'm sorry, my mouth is still like.
but also,
Okay.
uh, I continue to this day, even though we no longer are at the school because my kids are older. Um, there are emails, I would say, almost every day, every other day about deaths within the community. Someone's father died, someone's grandfather. Okay. And my loss was never included in an announcement. And I found that really sort of interesting and troubling. I mean, look, even if someone would have at least asked me if I wanted it to be included, I didn't know that I would have said yes. But
Right.
there was actually, no recognition, no effort to say, let's send food, let's send flowers, let's send a collective card, let's do anything. Nothing. Nothing was acknowledged. Um, yeah, and then about, I think, a week or two later, I went to get my son within the school, and I saw the teacher, and I said something to her. Like, she asked, how are you doing? And I said, like, I'm just really struggling. And she was like, oh, are you still thinking about that? I mean, I'm laughing because it was so long ago. And so I'm laughing so
Right.
long ago. And because actually I didn't include these things in the book. Now I wish I had. So what I do include in the book is just a more general thing about how looking toward the Jewish community, or looking to my sort of original upbringing, my cultural upbringing, like I didn't find much in the way of processing, acknowledging, or healing.
Right.
So that's sort of the extent of it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, your experience is not unique within the Jewish community, because we, number one, we know how to do death very well if it's, a child or an adult that's already been born and is full term over 30 days.
Mm.
But there are no prescribed
Yeah.
ritual pieces for anything, younger than that.
Right.
And
And I do appreciate that about our religion, though, that like, which allows for room to be open to abortion. Like I that part I wholeheartedly appreciate. However, I just think,
1,000%.
right. So, but I think there just needs to be more room and more nuance around, would you like to do something
Yes.
for 16-week experience for you, for your family? We're here for you. And we can even do whatever, a 10-second service, or we could include it in the newsletter to just even to combat, the silent stigma and shame that surrounds the topic. Like that Judaism wants to be part of breaking that taboo or something. I don't know.
Yes.
There's room for us to do that.
1,000%. And I will say, look, just remind everyone, how many years ago was this?
Right. So my loss was in 2012. So it's like 8 years
Right.
ago. Yeah.
Right. So I want to just share with people, forget about the I was supposed to have a baby space, but there are like in the last 5 years plus, I would say, like, 5, 6 years, there has been, and in some areas even longer than that, there has been a significant concerted effort to address exactly this,
Mm.
this void of experience for people who really are looking for some ritual way, some meaning, some service, some sensitivity training, awareness, etc. There has been a massive movement. One, like, let's call it what it is. Like, you started it in the secular community at large, but it's had so many ripple effects in all other communities. But these discussions are being had across spectrums, both in the Orthodox world, in the conservative world, in the Reform world, in all of the different disciplines. Many people are talking about them. There are websites, there are lots of different places. There are ritual baths that are specifically mikvahs, that are organizations that are doing services and dippings for individuals post miscarriage, post loss. Like there's so much now that there wasn't then. And it's just like, it's just listening to you and like hearing it again now is just heartbreaking.
Yeah, I would love to hear about these things because I also think too that it's never too late to memorialize or ritualize our losses. So I would even be up for something like that now, just as like a way to look back and incorporate that into my life and my healing. And
So we will talk afterwards.
yes,
But in the meantime, how like take us from your own experience of, you had this horrific traumatic miscarriage. You then went through this anxiety filled second pregnancy, right? Third pregnancy right afterwards, which thankfully ended up in a beautiful, healthy baby.
right.
But then, like, when did sort of your experience translate into, I now need to do something about this and now start talking about this on high?
Yes. So actually, my first piece that I wrote kind of soon after my loss, I wrote anonymously because I wanted to have the anonymity to like shout it all from a rooftop, but without claiming it. Like I didn't want to have self-consciousness around the fact that I'm a psychologist or, I didn't want people to be offended, whatever. So that's where it started. And then I kind of moved into writing about the pain and the politics of pregnancy loss, stayed away from the personal. And this was through my pregnancy with my daughter. But then once she arrived and she was healthy, it felt like it was time for me to take this on in a major, major way. It was sort of like, because, I had been hearing about grief. I had been hearing about the pain and the anguish for years and years. But then after my loss, I turned to the research, I turned to the science yet again, and was just so perplexed by the fact that the majority of people following a pregnancy loss are blaming themselves, are feeling guilty, and are feeling shame. And I just decided, like, I don't want to live in a world that views something this normative,
Right.
in this way, and felt like I have to do my part in my lifetime to make a dent. So it was October 2014 is when I wrote my first New York Times piece, and I held up the sign, that said hashtag I had a miscarriage. And I purposefully, you can't see my face in the image because I really wanted people globally to be able to picture themselves holding it. So it really wasn't about me. The first part of the piece is my story. And I really weighed the risks and the benefits before putting this out there, right? So thinking, okay, I'm a psychologist. Like, what does this say? What does this model? And I decided this is, the perfect way to combat all the things that I'd like to see melt away in our society, right? So it's showing the humanity of a psychologist, the vulnerability of being a person, and the goriness of what some of us live through, right? And then the second half of the piece, though, I'm essentially inviting people globally to question the shame, question the silence, question guilt, all of these things that everyone is quiet about because they're too embarrassed to say it out loud, or maybe they whisper it to a friend who's been through the exact same thing, but maybe not.
Right.
And I even was hoping that like grandmothers would see this and that, people would rethink ideas, narratives that they had of themselves for generations even. So anyway, that was my lofty aim or goal back then with that first piece. And then I didn't really know that I was starting a whole thing. I've just, year after year have continued to kind of add to that by writing various pieces on several different topics of life after loss, like, sex after loss, masturbation after loss, marriage, relationships after loss, all of that.
And why I had a miscarriage? Like, what was the idea behind? I mean, you
Yeah.
like, because you're speaking about the personalization, but the impersonalization, like this, like
Yeah.
conflicting pieces of, like, you wanted, like, it was your story, but you wanted it to be other people's story. So I mean, I think I know the answer because
Yes,
it
you
was
do. It's to claim one story. And the reason I didn't need my face was because it's not about me. I mean, yes, it's about me, but it's about all of us. It's about millions of people who have been through this very same thing. And that I thought collectively, if we question this together, if we let ourselves off the proverbial hook for whatever happened to us,
Yep.
that we could actually once and for all change the game and, flip the script, as everybody says, about this topic. So it's like, I had a miscarriage. It's just the statement gets us away from the shame, gets us away from the silence, gets us away from all the things that culture is kind of feeding us and grooming us to do from the get-go. So does that answer your question? Is that what
Very much. And I remember, I mean, I didn't know it was you, but it was like, now that you were saying that it was 2014 when this
yeah.
came out. So my twins were born. My last pregnancy, thankfully, was a successful one. My twins were born in 2013. And I remember reading that article. I don't
Oh,
remember if I saw it or somebody sent it to me, but knowing all of my experiences, and I was like, yeah, I had a miscarriage. Like, I had multiple miscarriages, but
yeah.
it was immediately, it had exactly that effect. It was deeply personal, but it was also, it was just so empowering. It was, oh
Yeah.
yeah, there are so many others like me. And it just exploded after that. It was like, I just watched it explode.
Well, and the other thing that you just said, it's like we can know we're not alone. I mean, you're probably a statistics person because you have a background in science and medicine, and so, but knowing you're not alone, I think, is completely different than actually feeling like you're not alone. And so that's also my aim. It's like, oh yeah, I know, 1 in 4, 1 in 4, 1 in 4. But then if you see these other people who are then sharing their stories and sharing their feelings and sharing their grief and sharing all, then you suddenly don't feel alienated, isolated, all the things that people are reporting feeling in the aftermath of loss. But it's time to be done with all that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Look, it was your hashtag, your mission statement of I had a miscarriage was the basis of why I named this organization. I was supposed to have a baby because I wanted I wanted the personalization, but also the empowering
I love it.
thing.
Yeah.
I was looking to capitalize on that. I said, she got it. Now, how do
Thank,
I switch this up to make
thank.
it still universal, but
Yes.
picking on a different aspect of this experience and making it more, because this organization is not only about miscarriage, it's about the
Right.
entire experience. And so, right, that was exactly it.
I mean, it's interesting. I'm glad you said that because, yeah, I feel like in my book and in my work and in my Instagram community, it is so much more than miscarriage. But since my experience was miscarriage, that's where I started. But of course, I include, you know, all the other stories.
Of course.
you
Of
know.
course. Look, it's while you and I both know, and it was specifically in your story and so many, I mean, millions and millions of others, one can have a miscarriage without having any fertility difficulties.
Right.
But if there are fertility difficulties on top of loss, it just, I mean, the grief and the anguish is just, multiplied exponentially. So yeah, yeah,
Profound.
yeah.
Completely.
Okay, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. I just want to ask you one other like big piece, like sort of big piece here. Like my question to you is, so like now, I mean, you're doing lots of writing and you're doing lots of, public speaking and lots of like this is your space to like you are the expert. People come to you because you have taken your personal experiences and this is now your space to for people to reach out to you. So my question is but on a more personal basis, how did your experience change the way you now relate to your clients?
Yeah.
Because I know personally, for me, like I'm a pediatrician by training. I was a pediatrician before I had children
Yes.
and then continued on in my practice after I have children. And I always say that I was a much better pediatrician and clearly, had a very different mindset, angle, attitude towards my patients. There were so many things that changed once I became a parent. So
Totally.
my question to you is, how does this now affect your work? How has it, and how does it continue to affect your work?
I mean, it's a brilliant question. I think in every single way. So there's not a singular answer to this complex, important question. I mean, yeah, and I get deep into this in the book where I want to show what it felt like for me to sit here and thinking, for example, like I came back pretty quickly to work, which I, have mixed feelings about. But I came back thinking like, oh, I'll just hop right back in. And instead, I was met with like patients wearing dark glasses because they were sad for me, or people sort of walking eggshells, wondering like, are you okay though? And are you,
Right.
are you be here? And I became quite concerned actually that somehow the space that's here for them is becoming somehow about me. And I didn't know exactly how to shift that back. And instead of trying to kind of, fend off their questions by saying, like, I'm fine, I'm totally good. I was ambivalent about having another child anyway, or like these things that I
Right.
could have, I decided that it was important to kind of be real with them. I mean, in a concise way. I
Right.
didn't
Because there still is like, the therapist client,
want
relationship. And so, right.
around them because I didn't want them to be worried. But I also I thought it was like this unique opportunity to let them in, like I said about my piece, like on this kind of like, I am not okay and I am okay. Like that I can do both. Like I'm here with you because I want to be here with you. And of course, I am struggling and I don't know how long that will last. And not to worry. I, of course, am somebody who's getting help for myself. So, like, so that they wouldn't kind of in any way be inclined to like become my therapist. Not that any of them would have thought.
Right.
Like some of them I've known for over 10 years. And so
Wow.
we have love for each other and respect for one another. And so, like, I could see how it would be tempting. But it's like I've been in therapy prior to my loss. I continued therapy in my loss. So I always have places to go for myself. And, so this many years later, I feel like patients now come to me thinking that I specialized in this because it happened to me. And unless they ask me directly, there's no need to
Right.
tell them the story. And doctors are, referring people to me. And I think, again, like even the doctors might think that I specialized in this after.
Right.
That's, so I would say like 80 something percent of my practice is loss. And this many years out and being way on the other side of pregnancy, never going to touch it again, I'm completely present and okay and in my seat with my patients, because I don't, I don't really have like trigger points. I mean, of course, like the anniversary of my loss brings up a lot for me, and I let it, and I want it to. And I look through pictures of when I was pregnant with her, and I like to look back at that time, and it's just wild. But on a daily basis with patients and their stories, the only thing that I can say is that it's actually enriched my work, the fact that I can understand what they're describing. And they may be describing a completely different set of circumstances, of course, but that I can relate to a lot of the feelings that they talk about. And I don't need to kind of bleed that all over them,
Right.
but I can hold that when they're describing feeling like the platitudes they want to punch people over, or feeling distant in their relationship, or that a family member was really disappointing, or that this amazing coworker came through, or whatever. I know all of that now myself, so it's really interesting the way it's all unfolded.
Yeah. And I think, again, like going back to one of the previous points, and you said it exactly, like plainly right here, you, like, it's possible. I mean, I'll only sort of say this about myself. Like, it's possible that if you hadn't had another healthy pregnancy, that
Yeah.
maybe your work would have been different, and maybe it would have taken a right turn somewhere else. And I say that very much about myself as well, that and that you can do this work because you had the experience, it enriched you, you thankfully had a healthy pregnancy, and now that enriches your work and your patients. But
Yes.
this is your life experience, and so you're drawing from it.
And the fact that you just brought up having a healthy child afterward, I will say though that I have a handful of patients who assess for themselves what they feel emotionally they can handle in terms of trying again. And I am very honest about the fact that it's not for everybody. And that I was so anxious through that pregnancy. Of course, I don't regret it, but it's not for everybody. And in no way do I think babies replace babies. I do not believe in like rainbows always follow storms. That is not true. So I think people, individually have to decide for themselves what they want and what they're willing to go through to get it.
Absolutely. Dr. Zucker, thank you so much for sharing your work and your life and your experiences. Look, this is with the world. Like, this is, we are all better for it. It's, you have enabled, like, I had a miscarriage, like, has enabled so many people to take ownership of it and be able to really put it in a place in their lives and be able to actually feel that resonance and that compassion from others. So I owe you a big debt of gratitude, because I personally benefited from it. But look at the rest of us. Like, look at this world now. It is a much different place than it was in 2014. So thank you.
Thank you for saying that. I mean, it's hard for me to take in, like all of this press and stuff around the book, and it's been just remarkable. And yeah, it's kind of hard to just drink.
I know. Look, none of us like to like hear pot, like like at some point we have to like filter it out because it's too much, but
Right?
it's very much deserved. And everybody,
Yeah.
look, I even tried to like wear like color-ish. I don't think I have any lavender or yellow, but so I tried. Everybody, please. So I'm going to put the link in my bio. I mean, but you can go to her bio and find it also. It's on Amazon. It's on everywhere. You can find it everywhere, anywhere, anyhow.
If you don't like to read, I also narrated the book, so you can listen to the book instead. Yeah.
Ooh, on Audible or
On Audible. Yep.
on
Yeah.
Audible. Okay, amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank
Everybody, you know where to find her. I'll link it here and again afterwards. I had a miscarriage. Dr. Jessica Zucker, thank you so much. Happy
you.
Passover, by the way. And you and I will talk afterwards.
Yes, we will. Thanks
Okay.
so much.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.